Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays with the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination. I'm Kristen Eshelman. I am director, or formerly director of innovation initiatives at Davidson College, and also a member of the team at the Charlotte Center. I'm here to just welcome you, first of all, and also to give you some information on how to engage with today's session. So as we proceed, the first 30 minutes or so will be a conversation with our guests and with Angela. And then we're going to open it up to you to ask questions. You can put those questions in the chat, or better yet, if you're willing, please come on screen and we will have you ask your question in person. We would invite you to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable, and we will get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Angela Gala, who will kick us off. Angela?
Thank you, Kristen. Hello and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Angela Gala and I'm with the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination. To all of you newcomers, welcome. For all of you regulars, this is Kristen's last Wisdom Wednesday. She will be Vice President of Library and Information Technology for Trinity College and going to Hartford, Connecticut. I'm going to miss you, my friend. To begin our event this month, I'm going to read a passage that reminds me of my own brief encounters with a higher state of consciousness. This is from Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we had thought to find abomination, we shall find a God. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. Where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world. Oh my, Joseph Campbell. Wisdom Wednesdays is a series of conversations between us. It is us together being on to something. I would like to thank our sponsor and partner, OrthoCarolina, for this series, along with all of our donors and supporters for their investment in our efforts and in our community. You make our work possible. I'm proud to be part of this team at the Charlotte Center. Our mission is to help people and communities flourish. Although I have been on a personal search to experience higher states of consciousness, when I heard Baroness Susan Greenfield on a podcast, I was fascinated by the science, but even more fascinated by her. Lady Greenfield, based mainly at Oxford University, is a neuroscientist who has published over 200 papers in peer-reviewed fellowships at the Collège de France, NYU Medical Center, and New York and Melbourne universities. She's published several books, and she holds 32 honorary degrees from the UK and foreign universities, and has received numerous honors, too many to list here. She is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and was granted life peerage in her own country. She is CEO of Neuro-Bio, a privately owned biotech with a therapeutic focus on neurodegenerative disease. Welcome, Susan. She's joined today by Guru Ranjit Deora, meditation master teacher and owner of Charlotte Meditation. A native of India, Ranjit is a student of the great Indian guru, Brahmachari. Sorry, I knew I was going to mess that one up, Ranjit. I'm so sorry. His name is Dhirendra Brahmachari, whose students included Indira Gandhi. Ranjit has been practicing meditation for over 40 years and has developed a very practical stance. His lessons combine ancient wisdom and practice with a focus on obtaining more joy, more clarity, and less stress in our current culture. His main approach is the discovery of the true self through meditation. As a young man, he walked the footsteps of Buddha, and after 40 years as a corporate executive, decided to leave that professional life to teach meditation. In addition to teaching private individuals, companies and nonprofits such as Bank of America, AT&T, P&G, and Novant Health, and many more, have engaged him for the health and well-being of their employees and constituents. And in the interest of full disclosure, Ranjit has been my meditation teacher for over 13 years and is one of my very best friends. His shared wisdom and meditation practices have transformed my life and the lives of my family. Welcome, Ranjit. Okay, you two, you have to take yourselves off mute. I can't do this alone.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Angela.
Yes, thank you for being here. Hi, Ranjit. Thank you so much.
Hi, Angela. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
How beautiful setting today. Lovely. Nice to meet Jane. I'm using your first name, Suzanne.
No, please.
Yes.
Otherwise, it sounds like something from Alice in Wonderland, you know, like the Red Queen or something.
Or
Yes.
shall I call Lady Suzanne?
No, I say it sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland, and so
Lovely.
please.
Wonderful meeting with you all.
No, Susan, obviously, yes.
Lovely.
Can I address you as Ranjit? Yes.
Yes, sure. That's my name.
Yeah. Okay. You're the first guru I've actually addressed directly, so just checking the etiquettes is appropriate here. Yeah.
No gurus and baronesses.
No gurus and baronesses.
Yeah.
No gurus. No gurus. That's
No, no,
Ranjit.
no.
Ranjit, Susan, and Ranjit, we're good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
wonderful.
good.
So the
Yeah.
two of you come at this topic of consciousness from two very different perspectives. And I'm really interested in the intersection, but let's get clear on one thing. And I'm going to start with ladies first. What is consciousness?
How long have you got, Angela? So
Not that long,
yeah.
actually.
This is, I think, the problem with defining consciousness is actually the problem of consciousness is that we all know what it is. We all know it's what you're going to lose tonight, most probably. It's what you lose if you're anesthetized. But actually defining something is difficult. And I think the reason for that is our normal strategies for definition are either operational. Love is when I give my mother 3 red roses or something. Or it's referring to what we could call a higher set or category. A table is a piece of furniture. Love is an emotion. But neither of those strategies can work with consciousness, because consciousness is when you do what? You don't have to do anything. You know, you can still be conscious and without emitting anything whatsoever. So there's no operational thing that will work. And referring to a higher set, what do you say? Consciousness is it's a property of the brain. Well, that doesn't really catch it, does it? So my own way of doing this is to actually be rather unrigorous and say, look, let's just do an informal definition because the normal strategies don't work. And let's say it's the first person personal world as it seems to you. It's the subjective world as it seems to you. And I know that's not very satisfactory. Any philosopher who's listening and watching probably would be rather irritated by that. But as a scientist, you have to be pragmatic. And what I've often said is, look, we all know what it is, don't we? Let's just press on and try and crack it. You know, let's try and do it rather than, you know, dancing on a pinhead here, trying to fret over definitions. So I'm many apologies if that's a rather flaky definition. But pressing on with that, I think one of the more important issues, if we are exploring consciousness, is to actually flag that there are various types. So, and I'd like to just make sure that we can clear the ground there. So there's unconsciousness when you're anesthetized or asleep. There's subconsciousness, which we may touch on, which as those devotees of Freud will know, it's where you are, of course, conscious, but you are not aware of the thing you're conscious of, so subconscious. There's ordinary old consciousness, which is what we share with, I would argue, and perhaps elaborate on this, all the animals in the animal kingdom to greater or lesser extents. And then there's self-consciousness, which is separate again. Okay, I think it's also important to distinguish consciousness from the mind. People often confuse those two, because you can lose your mind, blow your mind, be out of your mind, and you're still conscious. And conversely, you can lose your consciousness as you go to sleep. But when you go to sleep, you don't think you're going to lose your mind, do you? Or blow your mind. So the fact that we use those two phrases in a very distinct way, I think means that we have to be very careful. The reason I'm doing this is in a rather careful way, just tiptoeing around terms here so that we can, so just to clarify, we can't define consciousness formally, but we can really play lip service to its subjectivity. I think that's the important thing. There are 4 types of consciousness in that way: unconscious, subconscious, self-conscious, and conscious. And I think that therefore, once we've worked that out and drawn a distinction with the mind, and certainly the physical brain, so mind, brain, and consciousness should not be conflated. They'll have different emphasis. Now we can start, having done that. I hope that's satisfactory.
No, lovely. That was very, that was a fuller explanation than I think I've been given before.
That's always damning when
what I've
people
read
say
in
that.
your
That's
book.
code for saying you spoke too long. Yeah.
No, good.
Yeah.
Ranjit, what is consciousness from your perspective?
Consciousness, alertness, awareness, alive, and feeling within yourself peace or no peace. Consciousness is something within you, and you can experience it both unconsciousness or consciousness or subconsciousness or underconsciousness or higher consciousness. All these things are within you and you can feel them. Mindfulness meditation can lead you to that, how to realize who you are, what you do, and how do you feel. That's what meditation tells you with that. So in a human factor, there are 4 factors which motivates us as human beings. Number 1 is love. We all want to be loved, and we want to love somebody else. So that's a part of your human consciousness. You want to love people. Next is how you feel about your desires. Greed. We want more. We want more love, more affection, more everything, including richness, fame. We want more. That is our human desire, is a consciousness. Whether you are conscious or you are not conscious, but you want those things. And that's what motivates us to do more things in life. The next is fear. A fear leads us to do certain things, what we do or we don't do. Such as a small child gets up in the night and bumps on a small toy and he says something big, danger is there. But when we grow up, there is a bigger danger. How to pay the bills, how to pay the fee of a child in the college, how to take care of the relationships between man and a woman. And all those things motivates us to do something more. And the last is obligation. We are obliged to do things in life. We must take care of our adults. We must take care of our children. We must take care of friends. Especially these days in the COVID-19, people have not been able to meet their loved ones, especially the elderlies, grandparents, parents, and therefore now there are a lot of parties going on because we want to compensate that feeling of obligation. So these are the 4 factors which leads us in life, in consciousness. And all these happens because of consciousness. How to realize your consciousness? Meditate, meditate, meditate. Self-discovery is self-consciousness. And you will realize what you are, what you want to be, and how you feel, and how you like to be feel for yourself and others.
So what I hear you saying, and I want to make sure it's clear to everybody, is that through meditation, you become aware of the type of consciousness you're experiencing, and you
True.
become aware of the factors that are motivating you towards certain actions. And that's a different level of consciousness and awareness, because oftentimes we're doing things out of habit, or we're doing things because of those main 4 factors or something else, but we're not quite clear on why we're doing them. So those are different levels of awareness. And then one other thing that Ranjit and I talk about, and Susan, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. We talk about super consciousness, and that was not brought up. Now, I don't know if that's a scientific term or not, but when we talk about a higher state of awareness, he and I are generally talking about only a couple types of consciousness, that being one of them.
Okay, so we scientists are a bit more pedestrian, and we're trying to just work out what ordinary old consciousness is for the moment. Yeah, so let's start with that. And if I may, I'll attempt to give a scientific interpretation, neuroscientific background to what Ranjit was saying, how I would interpret that as a scientist and how I'd do that. So let's start with some questions that came up on the chat room I just saw about the evolution of consciousness and people being aware and so on. I think a good starting point is because some people think that only humans are conscious, or other people draw a line. And I think there's Jerry Edelman, who's quite a famous Nobel laureate, I think disenfranchises the lobster, perhaps because he eats it, I don't know, but he says the lobster's not conscious and so on. And other people pick out bits of the brain and say that that's the Rubicon that will make you conscious or not conscious, and of course that's complete rubbish. Yeah, so basically we cannot assume that the human brain has anything special about it that would enable you to be conscious and all the others in the animal kingdom not to be conscious, because if you look at the anatomy of the brain, the theme is the same. The theme is the same. Often different bits prosper and others in larger or smaller, but basically all the bits are the same, although some bits are different, bigger rather than qualitatively different. So the exciting thing, I think, is to say, well, is a rat conscious? I'm sure most people, perhaps some of the people here own dogs or cats. I'm sure you'll say your dogs and cats are conscious. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep them, presumably, if they were some mechanical little furry robots that you were just feeding for nothing. And so, so if we say, okay, how do we get around that? How do we explain animal consciousness? And there's one lofty, these super conscious even. How do we get around that? Because it's not, surely, how can that be explained? I think the answer is to say consciousness is not all or none. Many people think of consciousness, as I started off in the definition, as you're either unconscious or you're awake. You're either anesthetized or you're not anesthetized, asleep or awake. And I think that that actually leads to a false idea, because if you think about it, when you are asleep, or indeed when you're anesthetized, there's stages, there's depths of consciousness, of unconsciousness. So you go through different stages of sleep, and when you're anesthetized, the anesthetist knows very carefully what level to take the anesthetic and so on. So if unconsciousness can be graded, I've suggested that consciousness also can vary in degree, and this is touching on your answer, yeah, because superconsciousness would be a lot of it, yeah. Now, why thinking of consciousness in this way as being more or less a question of degree on a continuum, why that's very helpful to us scientists is that it actually introduces an element of quantification, because why consciousness has really been the anathema for many scientists is because it's something that scientists hate, which is subjectivity. Scientists love objective, impartial, objective observation. And subjectivity, by definition, defies that. And therefore, scientists don't quite know where to start with this ineffable subjective phenomena. Yeah. So if you say, okay, we've defined it as subjective, but nonetheless, we can think of it, something going on in your body and brain where you have more or less at different times, and different species will have more or less at different times, then we can try and see what's going on in the brain and body that corresponds to the more or the less subjective experience. Okay. So for a start, I'd like to say that my own view is we talk about raising our consciousness and deepening our consciousness all the time. And that does speak to this notion of having more or less, but one can apply it more simply to saying, yes, for example, a rat is conscious, but not as conscious as a dog, and a dog is conscious, not as conscious as a primate. And very controversially, and I totally don't want to get into this too much about the consciousness of the unborn fetus, but by definition, the fetus will be conscious, but not as conscious as a child, yeah? Because otherwise, is it when it squidges down the birth canal that suddenly it becomes conscious? Well, that's unlikely because of cesarean section. It means you'll never be conscious. Yeah, or when you're at 7 months, if you're premature, does that mean you have to wait 2 months before consciousness? No, obviously not. So my own view is that, yes, the fetus, that anything with a brain, however rudimentary, has a modicum of consciousness, but it's just that, it's a modicum. Yeah, and then it grows. So that's my first definition of how to think about levels of consciousness. And obviously, as a scientist, one wants to somehow root that in the physical brain. And that's where I think it's important to differentiate mind and brain and so on. And there are some people in my own university, Oxford, for example, that were very sniffy about the squalor of the physical brain, and they thought the mind was some kind of airy fairy above, you know, the sort of so the squalor of we scientists. And that, of course, is an unsatisfactory explanation, I think. And whilst one respects and obviously acknowledges subjective spiritual feelings, I would go further and say, yes, but something must be happening somewhere in the brain. We talk of fear, we talk of love, these things. And from my stance, that is a very exciting and important question to ask. And it can actually drive you mad, actually. If you say, if I said to you just now, oh, as I came on, suddenly I realized how the brain generates consciousness. You know, I know now. What would you expect me to show you? Would it be a performing rat? Would it be a brain scan? Would Angela, you suddenly be me and feel like me? We can't even think of what kind of answer would satisfy that claim or that question. Yeah. And so if you can't even think what kind of answer, how on earth do you get about pursuing it? Yeah. So so my own view as a scientist is what we go after are correlations. That's to say, people like Ranjit giving us subjective descriptions and indeed explanations for why we do things and how they feel. But all the time we're looking for a correlation in the physical world, something that matches up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you're being more comfortable in those unanswerable questions versus a lot of scientists come from your background. And
I know. It gives scientists a bad name, this kind of rather, bovine, sort of deliberately Philistine approach to anything that smacks of the arts.
Well, it's fascinating because Dr. Corbin is on this call. I see him and I'm sure he's nodding his head because he is also one who loves to live.
And Dr. Corbin.
He's where are you, Dr.
Oh, there you are, Dr. Corbin.
There he is. Yes. So he is also one of those scientists that that can live in the unknown, right? And
well, that's the whole point of science.
These big.
That's the whole point. If everything is known, why are we bothering? You know. And the other thing I just want to touch, perhaps it was Dr. Corbin that raised it. It is, why did consciousness evolve? And I'll just, if I can take 2 more minutes of the platform just to try and answer that. Because you can imagine a world of zombies. You can imagine a world where people are programmed to certain inputs to respond in certain outputs. But for me, it's the middle bit that is so important. It's what goes on between what goes in and what comes out. And indeed, that's what makes our life worth living, does it not? If someone said, you're never going to be conscious again, you wouldn't, that's tantamount to being dead, pretty much, isn't it? I mean, and indeed, certain patients in vegetative states, you know, we've had their life support in the UK has been turned off because they're going to be conscious, you know, so that's the same. So I think it's really important to think about that middle bit. And I would suggest that that middle bit is the bit that joins up dots in new ways, in different ways and spontaneous ways, AKA creativity, which is why the world has progressed as it has, not because people are giving rote outputs to certain inputs or learning from things. It's because one has the time, and the more sophisticated the brain, the more potential to actually innovate, to actually join up dots and see the world in a new way, which is in itself a very exciting and fulfilling subjective experience. Yeah.
So I want to ask Ranjit, what started you looking for higher states, different states of consciousness? I'm making the assumption that you were looking for higher states of consciousness versus unconsciousness.
From my point of view, I wanted to find out what is the truth. There are a lot of stories and a lot of things which goes around. Question is, what is the truth? What I hear, what I read, is that true? Or what I listen to people who are very learned people, are they talking the truth? Or was the story of Buddha was truth? What Indian scriptures and literature and poetry have written 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, what is the truth in it? Is that practical? And if it is really truthful and practical, how it can help me and the people who do not know about it? So I wanted to know the truth. How to find truth, or my endeavor, or my research, I would call it. I wanted to find out the truth.
Well, there is a sticky rabbit hole we could go down, which I love, because Susan, I have heard someone ask you about truth.
Oh, yeah. What did I say? Just so I'm consistent in my answers. What did I say?
You said truth and beauty
Oh,
are synonymous.
yeah.
Truth is beauty, beauty is
I
truth.
cannot
I knew what they were talking about. So I would
no,
love
I was
for you
quoting.
to
I
expand on
wouldn't.
that.
I cannot for 1 minute let you all think that I came up with such a brilliant equation myself. No, it was. If you read Keats' Ode to a Greek Vase, you'll see written on that is truth is beauty, beauty is truth, and that's all you need to know. And I can even say it in the ancient Greek. Yeah. So I cannot claim any originality, but I'm glad that I'm promulgating it and people are remembering it. I think we're particularly sensitive to it, and with respect to not going to in too sensitive in areas with regards your country over the last 4 or 5 years, but I think people have been more aware of truth and the importance of it with this much paraded phrase, fake news. And I think that has actually challenged people in a way. In the past, one assumed that most of what you heard, certainly through the media sources, was pretty much not completely contrived. And I don't know why people even use the word fake news. Why don't you just say lie? Why is it called fake news? And someone's saying alternative facts, I gather. So this has made us all actually cherish the truth more in a way perhaps 4 years ago we took for granted, and I think that it is something that's really important. What is the truth? And people say speak your truth. So I think it's something we all cherish and want, and I think we're increasingly aware in our current world it's something that is a very precious commodity and it can't be assumed.
Well, and I'm wondering from both of you, I feel like truth may be subjective. And so I'm wondering if you both realize you think this or
truth is not subjective.
Okay.
Truth is truth.
Okay. Speak to that a little bit, because I know when someone says something, how it lands on me sounds true, resonates true to me, or it doesn't. And I have a visceral feeling about that. And
truth,
that feels subjective to me, and perhaps it isn't.
Truth is felt real within yourself. I say there is a chip in you.
What? Say that again.
You have a chip in your body.
A chip.
Or mind.
Okay, like a microchip. Okay.
Or microchip. You have scientists sitting with us. You have a microchip in your mind or body or brain will tell you, is it a truth or not? Every moment, every second, what you do and what you do not do. So truth is within you, and you know, and you can recognize it. From my point of view, from the modern age point of view, brain is a motherboard of a computer, or human computer. Brain is a human computer. It's a motherboard of human computer.
Okay, if I may interject, it was very popular.
Mind is hard drive.
No. Okay, so there's two separate things we really must immediately.
Love a debate. Let's go.
Yeah. So the first is the brain is a computer. Let's do that one. And also that truth is eternal and it's there or it's not there. In science, with every best will in the world, people will accept certain facts as the truth. But science is utterly provisional, because along comes someone new or you find something else and you have to revise those facts. So that's no fakery, that's no deception, that's no duplicity. It simply is you weren't aware of all the facts and information when you first thought something was the case. Yeah. So therefore, you can't simply have this, to my mind, happy distinction between true or not true, and that's eternal, because truth as you perceive it with every good intention can be revised and modified, in science at least. Then we come on to the idea of the brain as a computer. Now, this used to be an idea because usually people find the most complex non-biological thing they know, and because the brain is the most complex thing they know, they think that one must be explained by the other. There was a great fashion when I was growing up for cybernetics, as it was called, cybernetics, and the brain was treated like that. There are some people that still think that the brain is like a computer, but it's what's his name? The guy that did Ray Kurzweil. You may have read of him or heard of him. He's the brain as a singularity. I've debated with him indeed, and the problem is, as the great now Nobel laureate Roger Penrose says, and he taught Stephen Hawking, mathematician from Oxford, he says, okay, so if the brain is a computer, what's the algorithm for common sense? What's the algorithm for intuition? And yet we are guided in much of what we do by intuition and common sense. And yet that you can't. There's also the famous Turing test devised by Alan Turing in about the 1940s, the great war hero who cracked the Bletchley Code, mathematician. He said, well, we can test if a computer's conscious and if we're like computers, because a person and a machine can be given impartial access to a questioner. And you as the questioner can ask the computer or the machine or the person anything you like, and they have to be able to identify who's the computer and who's the person. And as yet, there has been no machine that has passed the Turing test. So I think it's quite amusing. There's been some human beings who failed it, who've been deemed as computers. But I think we all know people like that. But no, the brain doesn't work algorithmically. It doesn't work computationally. It works in a highly qualitative way with lots of different chemicals. And if we are going to talk about hardware and software, the hardware is the software and vice versa. So you can't draw that distinction. If we're talking about the mind, as opposed to consciousness, yes, I think you can draw a clear distinction there, in that the physical growth of neurons as you mature in life, you have these little branches that come out from the brain cells as you grow. That increases the surface area of the brain cells so you can make more connections. And I've argued that it's the connections that enable you to see the world in your particular way, because those connections are forged by your experience. So I say that the mind is the personalization of the brain, like you might personalize a computer. But for me, that's as far as the analogy will go.
Yes, I think maybe we're talking in metaphors, and they're probably much looser than a scientist might be comfortable with, which I understand. So why did you search for it, Susan?
Me? Oh, okay, so
yes, back to you now. Why did
well, I didn't wake up one day and think, God, I've got to search for consciousness today, and I know there's been something missing. I better do that. It actually started when I was about 14 or 15, and I have a small brother, so he was about 3. I was about 16. He was 3 at the time, and he still remembers this. And I was fascinated even then, just by, if you think about it, what is going on? There's nothing reporting. There's no little man or little woman inside your head. And we take it so much for granted, this experience we're all having, well, unless you're all asleep by now, we're all having, that even when I was a teenager, so I got a dead rabbit from the butcher's, and my mum was horrified when I said I wanted to dissect it, and she gave me her nail scissors or something to cut into a nail file and banish me to this front room. And my little brother came with me, and he still remembers it. He was 3 and he was watching me kind of hack around in this dead rabbit. And we came to the eyes, and he said, when that rabbit was alive, it could see with those eyes, but now he can't. And I thought this was very profound for a 3-year-old to actually reflect on this ineffable thing that we were trying to look at, that was in this dead. He still remembers the dead rabbit. So so then at school I did, as we were talking earlier, Latin and Greek and ancient history, as well as maths. And that really inspired me, because especially the Greeks, the philosophers, were constantly asking big questions like that, which is why I hated science at school, because it seemed rather pedestrian. It was all about amoebas and distilling water and boring things like this, rather than metal expanding or something, rather than exciting big questions like why wars started and people fell in love, and like you could do in classics. So it was only when I went to Oxford and did philosophy and got slightly disillusioned again with it being very linguistic based, mired in problems over what, agony about what is the definite article, for example. That my tutor thought it'd be a laugh if I was a scientist. She said that, and she dispatched me.
Nice.
And it was only when I started doing a doctorate in neurochemistry, which was a bit of a leap, that I realized that the very questions that had baffled me as a 15-year-old when I was carving up the rabbit with nail scissors, that could be answered actually in a very pragmatic way, rather than just by spinning words. So I got fascinated by it, because really it's the heart of why we're all alive. It's what makes life worth living. And for me, it's the biggest question anyone, not just scientists, can ask. Yeah.
So science for you can answer questions that philosophy could not.
Well, you can get so far with philosophy, and you get mired with definitions, and you can't prove you're right or wrong.
Right.
But with science, you can actually start to make some kind of tangible headway. I feel you can.
Yeah, so you can get to approximate truth, right?
You can get to correlations, you get to provisional truths. They're always provisional.
Understood. So I'm going to ask Ranjit, what impact does the experience of higher states of consciousness have on our lives. So what is the potential it could have on our lives personally? What is the potential for it to have on our lives collectively?
Consciousness or higher state of consciousness is awareness, alertness. Again, I'm going back to. And meditation, when you meditate, meditation gives you clarity of mind. So when you have a clarity of mind, you are creative, you are active, you know what's going on, what's not going on, and what to do and what not to do. So the experience of yourself tells you what is the higher state of mind, how you think and you do things. Because there you are not attached or you are not judgmental about outcome, but you are aware of your being and what you are, and how it helps others, that if you are aware, you will do things which are good for you and for others as well. So it is non-judgmental. It's because mindfulness meditation is thinking or doing something with a purpose in the present without judgment. And that's mindfulness. And how to get mindfulness is that you are relaxed, you are meditating, and you are thinking, and you have a clarity of mind. And that gives you higher state of mind, higher state of consciousness, so that you know what to do and what not to do in life. And you can share that with others, what exactly your experience is and how it can help them in their own circumstances.
So what I hear you saying is when we're non-judgmental, we're less reactive, we're more peaceful, and we're more accepting.
Exactly.
So the way it can help us collectively is a little more peace in society, but most importantly, personally.
Very much personally, because I hear a lot of excuses here or in the whole world that the people who are poor, they are not able to make good judgment. I was poor as a child. I was raised by poor parents of mine, but they were aware about education. Okay, hey, education can help my child. And I grew up, I got education. I didn't become violent, but I learned non-violence because my parents taught me how to understand. My teachers taught me how to be non-violent and still do the things. And then comes Gandhi, and Gandhi taught non-violence.
Right.
So if the society is working right from home, charity starts from home.
Yes, James Baldwin.
Whatever you want to do, you start from home. And if your home is good, the society is good, you are good, the country is good, nation is good. So it depends how you are raised, how your consciousness is, how mindful you are, and how you are using that mindfulness or higher state of mind in the world.
Yeah, lovely. And
You
Susan,
don't have to be violent to show somebody that. So it reduces certain difficulties we face in our life, practical life. Higher consciousness of life is better because if we are not that conscious about, there are a lot of difficulties we face in life and we do not know how to overcome them. Like moho, maya, ahankar, these are the three words which we use all the time. That attachment, greed, and ego. Now, I do not know how science recognizes that.
Okay.
But attachment, greed, and ego, these are the three obstacles of our progress, in our progress. So if we know how to overcome these three, we will be in a higher consciousness of mind. It is the ego which people consciously or unconsciously do things. It is the attachment where we are attached to people, places, property. This is my best city. London is the best city in the world. Wow, I didn't like it.
Yeah,
I'm just giving you an example.
I understand.
So is this the attachment with people, places, property? We are used to it. So if you have a higher consciousness of understanding and consciousness, then you know how it is affecting you. Is it real? Is it the truth?
Mm.
Like I just give one example, one of the top journalists, very learned man. His mother passed away in India. He could not go there. And when somebody asked that question to him, he was very, very sad. He almost cried. It is called attachment. He could not do something which he wanted to do.
Mm.
So point is, if we are having difficulties in life, the meditation giving you clarity, and you can try and overcome these difficulties of attachment, greed, and ego. And that will take you to higher state of mind.
Thank you so much for that. Susan, did you want to?
Yeah, okay. So let me just put again a scientific perspective on that. I think from the level of...
Yeah, that would be great because I would like to learn that.
Yeah, okay. So I say leaving societal issues, which are not really the concern of the neuroscientists, and morality to one side, I think I can try and, again, give some scientific framework to these kinds of ideas. Let's take the individual. When you're very small, you are not self-conscious, and I don't think anyone would say a small child or a toddler had a higher state of consciousness or was experiencing any spirituality and so on. So let's think about the consciousness that we first have as we're growing up, and it's a very reactive consciousness to the outside world. I remember with my brother having an ice cream and it fell out of his hand, or I may have knocked it out of his hand, he burst into tears. You say, look at the birdie, suddenly the tears stop. So we know that small children are living very much taking the outside world at face value, being very much at the mercy of the outside world without any. So we talk about a sensory take on the world. Yeah, how fast, how swift. If you showed a small child a wedding ring, it wouldn't mean anything to the kid. They'd be attracted to it because it was gold and shiny, not because it meant anything. And it's only as the weeks turn to months, turn to years, and the connections form from experiences of wedding rings that they realize it only goes on a certain finger. And if they see someone with one of them, it means something. So only do they then realize what a wedding ring signifies, and they wouldn't be able to extrapolate that from the sensory properties alone. So gradually you shift from a sensory evaluation of the world, how fast, how bright, we're just reacting, to a cognitive take, because as you get more infrastructure going on with your connections and more of a conceptual framework, you can then start to evaluate the world on a more cognitive, from the Latin cogito, I think, cognitive take on the world. So then you can decide to have a personalized view of certain people, wedding rings, what they mean. If someone comes to you dressed up in a monster outfit, you won't be frightened because you know you're not taking it at face value. And incidentally, someone with dementia goes back to being like a child again. It's as though those carefully curated connections, well, they are slowly dismantled. So that again, someone with dementia is like a small child and they see the world. So in both those cases, I would say that this is at the lower end of the consciousness spectrum, where you're very much at the mercy of the outside world. What I find fascinating, and this does touch on the morality, is that we as adults sometimes go back into that world. Wine, women and song, drugs and sex and rock and roll are all examples of blowing your mind, losing your mind, being out of your mind. Ecstasy in Greek is to stand outside of yourself. And those the strategies we use are to impair the connections between our brains by taking psychoactive substances or putting ourselves in an environment that has a very strong, pure sensory input, such as, I don't know, rave, techno, or a very fast-paced sport or dancing. Yeah. So wine, women and song, drug and sex and rock and roll have in common that you have put your carefully curated mind on hold, and you're very much again the passive recipient of what's coming in. And we talk indeed of having a sensational time. Let's go out and have a sensational time. You don't say let's have a cognitive time, quite sensational time. So I think that if we are thinking about higher states and morality and how it touches and how we interact with others, we have to layer on that these two types of mode for the adult human brain. One, the carefully corrected self, where you have a past, a present, and a future, where the present is very much informed by the past and projecting into the future, and that's dictating how you're acting. But then again, just sometimes, wine, women, and song, drug, sex, and rock and roll, you're in a state that is mindless, where you are the passive recipient of your senses, and you are otherwise, if you're self-conscious, you're a terrible dancer, as most of us know. If you're aware of yourself, you're awful. Yeah? So you have to be abandoned to your senses. Yeah, and that for some reason, we pay a lot of time and money to go into those states, to do fast-paced sports or go to parties or so on. And I think the evolution reason for that, touching on the evolution issue, is that when you're in that state, you will engage biologically in behaviors that will enable the continuation of the species, like eating and copulating. Whereas if you are retreating to your own mind, you're not doing those things, then we'll die out. So I think in evolutionary terms, that might be a reason for us having fun. The problem I have, especially with the current world, is that people go too much now into that sensational world. And I think especially with screen technologies, that is robbing people of going into past or future, and they're so much focused on the present and being driven by the senses that actually they're staying as superannuated children. But that's another story for another day.
That's a big conversation. I think Kristen's got somebody she wants to bring up.
We do. We have a really good question crossing these boundaries between the spiritual and the physical. So we'd like to invite Jonathan Fisher up to ask his question.
Hello. Let's see.
Let's see.
Hi, wonderful seeing both of you. Susan and Ranjit, hey, it's such a pleasure. And I'm in cognitive mode in this moment, and I'm trying to remind myself that there's another mode to be in. And having both of you here together with the excellent moderation of Angela, it brings me back to Descartes and the split in the way that we approach ways of knowing. Whether the science and spirit are one or whether they are separate. And and I wonder whether there's a true distinction there. My own personal view is there tends to be conflict when we have people in the same space coming at answers from either a quote scientific or a quote spiritual view. And some of it may be our understanding of the word spiritual. It seems like there are different ways of knowing, of being aware of our own experience. Some of them are cognitive. And as you were just saying, Susan, some of them are more relating to a flow state, or as Guru Ranjit might say, an open awareness state, a non-cognitive, a pre-verbal state. And I'm wondering, is there a way, this is the peacemaker in me, is there a way to allow for both science and spirit with less of a dichotomy between the two as we work to understand self-consciousness?
Okay, can I take that one? Because that's a super question, thank you. Yeah, I've sat through, I used to be married, I'm no longer married, to someone who was a very vociferous scientist, who was very anti-religion and so on. So I'm quite rehearsed in hearing some of what I would regard as bigotry on his part, being anti. I'd much rather cite the William and Lawrence Braggs, the famous pair, father and son, that won the Nobel Prize. And I don't know whether it's the father or the son that said about religion and science, he says, yes, of course they're opposed. He said, like the thumb and the forefinger are opposed, and that by having them together, you get to something better. Yeah. And I think that's a lovely take on the world. I'd also cite very gifted scientists, like there's someone called Jocelyn Bell Burnell who discovered pulsars, and she's a very committed Christian. Yeah. Now these people are not in any way lame brains, So I think that it's an arrogance of people, and I'll name names, like Richard Dawkins and like my ex-husband who's called Peter Atkins, and I don't mind naming names. I think that's an arrogance to assume that everyone else is misguided and they alone, by saying the most obvious and silly things about belief can disparage it. So as a true scientist, I think, has an open mind. It's nonetheless a critical mind. You don't just blindly accept anything that's told you, but I will respect and accept if people feel things I don't feel. It's with religious people, I have to say, a certain jealousy. I feel like a spiritual autistic person. I feel for many cases that they're experiencing things that I don't, even though I'm aware that they have this separate thing. And I was certainly waiting for that to come along for me. So thank you for that question, Jonathan. I think it's very important that scientists go on record as having a bit more humility than some of them had in the past. That's not to say that one rolls over. I think it's like two ways of looking at things. With quantum mechanics, as you know, because I see you're a medic, you can specify something by position or momentum, but never both at the same time. Yeah. So it's a bit like that, just like two sides of the coin. So I think that the two can live together, rather as in quantum states, things live together. You can express the same thing in two different ways without either being invalidated. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We also had a good question from Mark Perez. Mark, we would love for you to come on stage and ask your question about the study of consciousness and where it's going next.
Kristen, can you see me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, terrific. I posed the question, where is the study of consciousness going next? And I would reframe the question for Ranjit. How is meditation itself an evolutionary practice? How might it be different today than it once was?
I'll let Ranjit go first because I just answered.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, how might the practice of meditation be different today than it once was? And the question to Susan is, where is the study of consciousness now going, and how is the problem of consciousness now being understood?
Meditation has not changed. It is still the same. What changed is we. We changed. Our requirements changed. Our thinking changed. Environment changed. So meditation is still the same. It is up to us what suits us, and we accept that and we do it. There are 108 types of meditations. And they are for everything what you need in life. So whatever you need, if you have, let's say, stress, what meditation you should do. You have anxiety, what meditation is good for you. You have sleep disorder, what meditation you should do. If you have a depression, what meditation you do. And if you have an anger, what meditation is required. So there are 108 meditations. We can choose what we want and what we need for ourselves. These are made for you.
Angela, if I might follow up, if there are 108,
yes.
Why might not there be 109 or 110?
If you ask me honestly, yes. You can make 129 or 200,000. I give one example. Yoga in America is a fitness program. When yoga was introduced 100 years ago in Chicago, it was introduced as a spiritual practice. But we felt here in America that, hey, we don't want another spiritual organization to come and teach us what to do. So we accepted yoga as a physical fitness program. And today, yoga has got all kinds of different yoga techniques, like flying yoga, rope yoga, goat yoga. So you can do it, sure. Does that answer?
Good enough, thanks.
Okay, so I'll answer where it's going. I think that's the harder question, actually, because it was well known that if any scientist who wanted to study consciousness mentioned that in the grant, you wouldn't get the grant. And you had to sort of dress it up as schizophrenia or anesthetics or something like that, because so it was a great truism. Only the Nobel Prize winners like Jerry Edelman got to work on consciousness because no one else could afford to do that. There was a time about 10 years ago when there's a great flurry of conferences. One is a big center in Arizona, for example, another one, I seem to remember, in Texas. Certainly in the States, there were lots of really interesting workshops, and I attended one or two myself. But I think it's always a question of money, and it's always a question of actually framing what question to ask. And there may still be going on. Perhaps I'm not invited anymore because I'm now much more focused on the very pragmatic thing of trying to get a novel treatment for Alzheimer's, which is the day job. So it may be simply that I'm out of the usual crowd now, but I'm not aware. It seems now to be something that I think people have been overtaken by COVID and screen technologies, and the luxury of sitting back and asking a big question and savoring it and thinking about it in this way that's not necessarily related to the immediate day-to-day existence, I think perhaps has fallen by because of those things. But I say it might be just that I'm not invited anymore to conferences, but I'm not aware of any great breakthrough. I'm sure had there been some really spectacular breakthrough in terms of understanding consciousness, it will be on the front page of Nature or of Science or one of the big, or the press would have picked it up. I think perhaps the way it's going now in terms of scientific approach is clinically, where people are doing clever things like stimulating brain and having readouts of consciousness or readouts of people who can't move and what they're thinking and so forth. So I think it's very much the province now of the clinicians. But in terms of the deep philosophy of what would we want to know, how do we know it, I'm not aware of any immediate breakthroughs. I think it's still very open to people to try and think about.
Wonderful. So I think we have time for one more. And David, if you can bring up Jennifer Dow, that'd be great. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I was curious about how, based on what you guys were talking about in the tension between the spiritual side of this and the scientific side of this, is it the fact that there is a tension be part of its power? I remember being at a talk not that long ago where a man was using music theory to explain how pressing into the tension, that once it's resolved, that's when that harmony comes. And how do you see that? Do you agree? Do you think that that's possible here? And then if so, what does it look like for an individual, but also in a communal sense?
Okay. So again, being picky about terminology, I think for questions like that, which are really interesting, you have to again separate out religion from belief, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And quite often the easier route for the somewhat narrow-minded scientist to take is to talk about religion versus science. And I think that that's too easy, because that doesn't really capture what I think you're getting at, and that fascinates me and which I respect in others, the subjectivity. If you, for example, I've got some very observant friends and they know God exists, they just know it. They don't have to prove it any more than I have to prove I love my mother to anyone. You just know you do. Whatever anyone said. And I get the feeling with them as I stand there, my outside nose pressed up against the window, looking at them, that, they just know it's there. So that's what interests me. And I think that is compatible with science in terms of exploring what might be going on when people have that kind of feeling and belief. I think it's not very helpful to bring out the tired-old arguments about the evils of religion or not versus science and what science, I think that's a debate that's too easy and not very interesting. Whereas I do think that exploring something that isn't material and why that's important to us, why it's important to go to quiet places, special places, why it's important to be on your own, why it's important. Those things I think are very interesting questions, but all science does really is give you correlations. It's not going to answer the same questions that a spiritual quest would answer. And I think you can be on both those journeys without the one affecting the other too much.
That's lovely. Oh my gosh. I think we could go for another hour and not tap out on this conversation, but unfortunately it's 1 o'clock and I hate to see it end. But I want to thank Susan and Ranjit for their time and energy on our call and all of the preparation that goes before it. If what we're doing resonates with you, there are things you can do. Kristen's going to drop those into the chat and we would love to engage with you. Thank you to our donors and sponsors once again for making our work possible. And thank you to our producer, David Phillips, for always making us look good and for his thoughtful collaboration. While this concludes our program for today, we are happy to stay on this Zoom for a few minutes later and still have this discussion. If Ranjit and Susan can hang on, that's lovely. If not, we can have the discussion together, but feel free to stay with us. Thank you so much.